At Christmas dinner, my 13-year-old granddaughter suddenly collapsed and had to be rushed to the hospital. While we were all terrified, my daughter-in-law posted online, "Finally got rid of the brat who only knows how to get attention." That's when I started planning everything. When she came home and found that on the kitchen table, she started screaming like a maniac. But before we continue, check if you are subscribed to the channel and share in the comments where you are watching us from. We would love to know how far our revenge stories reach. I was standing in my small kitchen. The sweet aroma of spiced cider bubbling on the stove filled me with warmth. The smell of cinnamon mixed with ripe apples. A reminder of Christmases past when the whole family gathered and everything seemed perfect. I gently stirred the pot of hot fruit, careful not to spill the bright red liquid that glowed like a small flame. Beside me, Sarah, my 13-year-old granddaughter. She was carefully placing freshly fried donuts on a plate. Her small hands trembled slightly as she sprinkled the powdered sugar, each grain shining like white snow. "Grandma, your donuts look beautiful," she said with a clear, happy voice, her brown eyes full of joy. I smiled, stroking her shiny black hair, feeling a warmth fill my chest. For me, Sarah was not just my granddaughter, she was my whole world, the only light I had left since my husband Richard passed away. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. The guests began to arrive, bringing laughter, lively conversations, and greetings of Merry Christmas Eve. My small house in our town filled with life. My cousin Linda came in and hugged me tight. Her jasmine perfume reminded me of my youth. Mark, my brother-in-law, with his wide smile, gave me a strong hug. He talked nonstop about the casserole his wife had prepared. Christmas carols played cheerfully from the old speaker. Mixing with the delicious smell of the stuffed turkey baking in the oven, I moved from one side to the other, greeting everyone, making sure everything was ready. It was Christmas Eve, a night for family, for unity. I wanted everything to be perfect, not just for me, but for Sarah, so she could feel the love I always wanted to give her. But then the front door opened one more time, and the atmosphere seemed to tense up a bit. At least inside me. My son Ryan and Jessica, my daughter-in-law, walked in. They were late, as always. Jessica stood out in her tight, sparkling red dress, like she was going to a fancy party in the city, not a family gathering. She walked past me, gave me a superficial hug, her lips curved in a polite smile. No emotion. "Hi, Mom," she said in a light voice, and she immediately joined Ryan's friends, whom I barely knew. Ryan kissed me on the cheek and asked quickly, "Everything okay, Mom?" I nodded and smiled, even though a slight uneasiness tightened my chest. I watched him walk away and wondered, since when had this distance opened up between us? I turned my gaze back to Sarah, and my heart sank. She was shyly approaching Jessica, carefully holding a donut in her small hands, still with sugar on her fingers. "Aunt Jessica, try Grandma's donut. It's delicious," she said with enthusiasm, as if offering a precious gift. Jessica looked at the donut. Then she glanced down at her expensive dress. "Thanks, but I'm watching my figure," she replied coldly, immediately turning to talk to a friend, leaving Sarah standing there alone with the donut in her hand. I saw my granddaughter's small shoulders tense up and the light in her eyes dim like a lamp someone had turned down. I wanted to go over, hug her, tell her it was okay, but I held back. I did not want to make things more tense. I just walked by her, gave her a pat on the shoulder, and whispered, "Come help me set the table, my love." The dinner began. The whole family gathered around the old oak table that my husband had loved so much. I served honey-glazed ham, that delicious-smelling fish with a thick apple salad. Everyone raised their glasses, the sound of toasts mixed with laughter and cheerful congratulations. Jessica, as always, became the center of attention. She told jokes in that high-pitched voice of hers, making Ryan's friends burst out laughing. I looked around the table trying to enjoy the moment, but my eyes could not leave Sarah. She was sitting silently in a corner, her plate almost untouched. She moved the piece of turkey from one side to the other, as if just pretending to eat. Her face was pale, and those brown eyes that always sparkled now looked dull. I felt a wave of concern rise within me, but I tried to calm myself, thinking maybe she was just tired from the noise. Then, in an instant, Sarah gently pulled on my sleeve. She leaned towards me and whispered in a voice so low I had to strain to hear her, "Grandma, my stomach hurts." I felt my heart stop for a second. I put my hand on her forehead and noticed a strange warmth. "Wait a moment. Honey," I said, trying to stay calm, although I was distressed inside. I got up intending to go to the kitchen for a cup of chamomile tea, that remedy my mother used on me when I was a child. But before I could take a step, a sharp laugh echoed from the other side of the table. It was Jessica. She was staring at us, her red lips curved in a mocking smile. "Here we go again with the drama," she said in a tone so loud that everyone turned to look. "Oh, Stella, do not spoil her so much. This girl always wants to play the victim to ruin the party." The atmosphere froze. Some relatives laughed awkwardly, trying to hide the tension. Ryan, sitting next to Jessica, looked visibly uncomfortable. "Come on, Jessica. Do not say that," he muttered, though his voice was weak, unable to stop his wife. I looked at Sarah. Her small shoulders were trembling, her head bowed over the plate, her hands clenched under the table. Her eyes were red, but she was not crying. She did not say anything, just enduring it in silence. I felt a pang in my chest, as if someone was squeezing it tightly. I wanted to scream, "Defend her!" but I held back, fearing that one word would make everything worse. Instead, I took her hand and squeezed it gently as a silent promise that I would not leave her alone. Ryan, perhaps aware of the tense atmosphere, turned up the volume of the music. The Christmas carols filled the air again, hiding the uncomfortable silence. People resumed their conversations, the toasts and laughter, trying to pretend everything was normal. I got up intending to take Sarah to her room so she could rest and I could check on her better. But just as I put my hand on her shoulder, everything fell apart. Sarah staggered. Her brown eyes went wide and rolled back. She collapsed, pulling the tablecloth down with her. Wine glasses shattered. The sound of breaking glass echoed like a scream in the silence. I screamed, my voice broken by panic. "Sarah, my child." I knelt beside her, my trembling hands holding her pale face. The music stopped abruptly. Everyone jumped up, startled. Chairs moved. Shouts filled the room. Ryan ran towards us. He knelt beside me and called out to his daughter, "Sarah, wake up, please." I looked at her. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing was weak. My heart was pounding hard as if it wanted to break out of my chest. I did not know what to do. I just held her, desperately praying silently for a miracle. And then, in the midst of all that chaos, I heard Jessica's voice. She stood up, crossed her arms, and sighed with annoyance. She looked down where Sarah lay motionless on the floor and said with a chilling calm, as if talking about the weather, "See, I told you, she always exaggerates." Those words were like a stab straight to my heart. Then, in plain view, looking into her cold, empty eyes, feeling the whole world collapsing around me, my son-in-law Mark, who always kept calm in difficult moments, quickly took out his phone and called 911. "The ambulance is coming. Stella," he said with a firm but calm voice, becoming a point of support in the storm. I heard the siren in the distance, and every second felt like an eternity. When the white ambulance stopped in front of the alley, the paramedics rushed in and placed Sarah on a stretcher. I held my granddaughter's hand tightly, not wanting to let go for even a second. "Can I go with her?" I asked, almost begging. The nurse nodded, and I got into the vehicle hastily, with my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would break my chest. Inside the narrow ambulance, I sat next to Sarah, holding her icy hand. The streetlights of our town blurred past the window, blurred by the tears I could not hold back. I looked at her face, her lips pressed together, and in that moment I wanted to scream to the whole world that I could not bear to lose another loved one. Richard, my husband. He had been gone for 7 years, and Sarah was all I had left. The only light in a house full of memories. I whispered, even though I knew she could not hear me. "I am here, my love. I am not leaving your side." The ambulance stopped in front of the hospital, and the cold lights of the hallway blinded me. The smell of disinfectant turned my stomach. The nurses pushed Sarah's stretcher towards the emergency room, and the door slammed shut in front of me, like a wall separating me from my granddaughter. I stood there motionless, feeling the world shrink to the dry sound of that door. I wanted to run after her to stay by her side, but my legs did not respond. I could only stand still watching, praying in silence. Ryan and Jessica arrived shortly after. Ryan paced back and forth in the waiting room, pale with the phone glued to his ear, calling everyone. "Linda, Sarah collapsed. No. Mom is here. I do not know. The doctor has not said anything yet," he said with a trembling voice. A mix of worry and panic. I looked at him, wanting to hug him to tell him everything would be okay, but I could not. My soul felt tied in a knot, not just for Sarah, but for the helplessness of seeing my son not knowing what to do. Jessica, on the other hand, sat in a plastic chair, crossed her legs, and tapped the floor with her heel, annoyed. She took out her phone, checked her makeup, and muttered with frustration. "Our whole Christmas Eve ruined. I told you she was just faking it." Her words were another stab. I could not believe it. I did not want to believe she was capable of saying something like that while my granddaughter was fighting for her life. I turned around facing her with my voice trembling with rage. "Jessica, please shut up. My granddaughter is in there." She smiled dismissively, her eyes cold as ice. "Your granddaughter is also a burden to my husband." Ryan, exhausted, intervened. "Jessica, that's enough." But his voice was weak, without strength to stop her. I turned away, avoiding her gaze, fearing that if I looked at her one more second, I would say something I would later regret. Time passed slowly in the waiting room. Each tick of the wall clock was like a hammer blow to my head. I sat down, clasping my hands tightly, trying to stay calm. The image of Sarah collapsing on the floor replayed over and over in my mind, every detail like a slow-motion movie. I blamed myself. I should have realized sooner. I should have taken her to the hospital as soon as she said her stomach hurt. I looked around. The cold plastic chairs, the completely white walls, and suddenly loneliness hit me hard. I had already lost Richard. I had already lost those days when the family was complete. And now I could not bear the thought of losing Sarah too. Then the emergency room door opened. A young doctor, with his white coat stained with sweat, he came out and called out loud, "Family of Sarah." Ryan and I got up immediately, almost running towards him. The doctor looked at us with a calm but serious voice. "She has acute appendicitis. It was about to burst. We have to operate on her immediately. Luckily, you brought her in time. A little longer, and her life would have been in danger." His words were like a slap in the face. I felt my legs give way. I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. Ryan sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands, his voice breaking. It was my fault. I should have believed her. I looked at Jessica, expecting to see some regret, some concern, but she was just standing there, with her arms crossed, without saying a word, staring blankly at the floor. The nurses brought Sarah out on a stretcher to take her to the operating room. She had regained a little consciousness. Her tired eyes barely opened. "Grandma?" she whispered weakly. I ran after her. I took her hand, that small hand, now as cold as ice. "I am here, honey," I murmured, trying to smile even though tears blurred my vision. "Everything is going to be okay." I squeezed her hand tightly, as if by doing so I could keep her with me forever. The operating room door closed, and I stood there, motionless, watching her figure disappear behind the opaque glass. Ryan went to do the hospital paperwork, leaving me alone with Jessica in the waiting room. She stood up and said in an annoyed voice, "I need to get some air." I did not respond. I just nodded, grateful that she was leaving. I was left alone in that row of cold chairs. Listening to footsteps, whispers of nurses, I took out my phone, thinking about texting Linda to tell her what happened. But a social media notification popped up. I opened the app, and my heart stopped. The most recent post, at the top, it was from Jessica. It was a selfie, her radiant smile. Behind her, the Christmas tree shining in my house. Below the caption, "Finally got rid of the dramatic brat. A peaceful Christmas Eve to everyone." I stared at the screen, feeling the world collapse, the hospital noise, the footsteps, the voices. Everything disappeared. Only Jessica's mocking face remained. And those cruel words, like fire burning in my mind, sitting in the cold plastic chair of the waiting room. The phone light illuminated my face. It was so cold, like the fluorescent lamps above my head. I stared at Jessica's post. I read it over and over, hoping I had misread it, that it was a nightmare. But no, every word was clear, cold and ruthless. Sarah, my granddaughter, who at that very moment was fighting for her life in the operating room, had been called a dramatic brat by her own stepmother. I felt an unbearable weight in my chest, as if a huge stone was crushing my heart and stopping me from breathing. My hands were shaking as, almost without realizing it, I scrolled down to the comments section. The lines appeared one after another, and each sentence was like a hammer blow to my mind. A friend of Jessica's, named Valerie, wrote, "Ha ha, peace at last. Let's open the tequila to celebrate. Girl." Another person, maybe her cousin, added, "I knew it. She only knows how to play the victim. Enjoy your Christmas Eve, honey." Thousands of ha-ha and like emojis appeared, like an invisible crowd laughing at my granddaughter's pain. No one, not a single friend or relative of Jessica's, asked about Sarah's condition. Not one question, not a hint of concern, just indifference and cruelty disguised as fake smiles on social media. I felt a chill run down my spine, not from the hospital cold, but from the harsh truth that the people around Jessica did not consider Sarah part of their family. The trembling in my body stopped abruptly. Another kind of coldness, not from pain, but from determination, spread throughout my being. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I could not let emotions overwhelm me, not now. I pressed the screenshot button, over and over, carefully saving Jessica's entire post, every comment, every reaction. I opened my email and sent all those images to myself, with the subject line, proof. Every time I hit send, I felt like I was building a protective wall for Sarah, even if only in my mind. I did not know what I would do with that proof yet, but I knew I would not let this cruelty go unanswered. Ryan returned with 2 cardboard cups of coffee, the soft aroma mixed with the cold air of the waiting room. He looked at me frowning and asked with concern, "Mom, what's wrong? What did the doctor say?" I did not answer immediately. I just handed him the phone with Jessica's post. Still on the screen. I watched his face, every little change. First it was confusion, then his eyes widened, in disbelief. Finally, his face turned red, a mixture of shame and rage. "This cannot be," he muttered in a trembling voice. "She could not have done this." But I knew that deep down, he understood it was true. Ryan gripped the phone tightly, as if he wanted to smash it. He got up and ran out of the room. I heard his voice in the hallway, furious but contained. "Jessica, what the hell are you doing?" I stayed seated, without following him, without wanting to hear more. I knew that conversation would lead to nothing. Minutes later, Ryan returned alone, with a defeated expression. He sat next to me, avoiding my eyes. "She said it was just a joke," he muttered. "Her friends always joke like that." I looked at my son, the boy I raised and loved for so many years, and I felt an impossible distance to bridge. He did not dare to face the truth, or to defend his own daughter. Ryan's weakness more than Jessica's post was what truly broke my heart. I did not argue. I just nodded, and took the phone from his hands. At that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. Ryan would never fully be on Sarah's side. He was too weak in front of Jessica, too easy to manipulate. From now on, I would have to act on my own. I would be the one to protect Sarah, just as I promised Richard before he left. I looked down the long hallway, where the fluorescent lights continued to shine coldly, and a silent vow took shape in my heart. I would not allow Jessica to hurt my granddaughter ever again. An older nurse walked past me. Her appearance was kind. With silver hair pulled back in a high bun, she stopped when she saw me sitting alone, with a look full of compassion. "Do you want a blanket, ma'am?" she asked me in a soft voice. "The nights in the hospital are very cold." I smiled weakly and thanked her. The small kindness of a stranger, even if it was just a question, made me feel warmer than any word from my own family. It highlighted even more Jessica's cruelty and Ryan's indifference. I adjusted my coat, trying to hold on to the little warmth left in my chest. Then the light above the operating room door went out. My heart stopped for an instant. The doctor came out, his face less tense, though still serious. "The surgery was a success," he said in a firm voice. "We acted in time. The girl will be moved to the recovery room." I let out a breath, as if the whole world had stepped back from the abyss. Ryan jumped up and thanked the doctor profusely, but I just nodded silently. His words were like a ray of light, although my mind was not fully there. When the nurses pushed Sarah's stretcher out, I saw her pale face, her eyes closed, and my heart clenched again. She had survived, but I knew my battle was just beginning. I stood there watching the stretcher disappear around the corner of the hallway, and in my mind, the image of Jessica's post continued to burn. Those cruel words, her fake smile, and the indifference of those around her were like a fire urging me to act. I clutched the phone in my hands, where I kept the proof, and felt a new strength growing inside me. My promise had been sealed, not with words, but with the determination of a grandmother willing to do anything to protect her granddaughter. I sat in the chair next to Sarah's bed in the recovery room. The heart monitor beeped steadily and softly. As I looked at her pale, sleeping face, the memories of Jessica's treatment came back one by one, like a slow-motion movie. I remembered the first day Jessica moved into our house. Sarah, who was barely 10 at the time, spent the whole afternoon in her room, drawing carefully on a colored piece of paper. It was a drawing of our house with the red tile roofs and a bright Christmas tree in the yard. In the center, she drew 3 people holding hands, Ryan, Jessica, and herself, all smiling. Sarah brought the drawing shyly, her eyes full of hope. "Miss Jessica, I made this for you," she said excitedly. Jessica, busy organizing her closet full of designer shoes, barely glanced at it before leaving it on the nearest table. "Yes, it's nice. Now let me finish arranging this," she replied in a cold voice. No interest. The drawing stayed there forgotten until I quietly picked it up and put it in my bedroom drawer. I still remember Sarah's disappointed look, how she lowered her head and her small shoulders trembled. I convinced myself that Jessica just needed time to adjust. But now remembering it, I know that was the first crack. Then I remembered a morning a few months later when I walked into the living room and saw Jessica taking down the photos hanging on the wall. Those photos were precious memories of our family, especially a large one, where Caroline Ryan's deceased wife held Sarah during her baptism. Caroline smiled sweetly, her eyes full of the love she felt for her daughter. I stood frozen and asked, "Jessica, what are you doing?" She turned around and smiled with a sweetness so fake it chilled my blood. "I just want to freshen up the space a bit, Mom," she said in a soft voice, as if trying to comfort me. "Let's leave the past behind. It will be better for Sarah, too." But I clearly saw the satisfaction in her eyes as she took down the photo, as if by doing so, she was erasing Caroline's image to take her place. I said nothing. I just kept the photo in my room, but a sense of unease began to grow inside me. I wondered if I was being too sensitive, or if this was really a sign of something worse. Another memory came into my mind, even more bitter. It was a night when Jessica decided to cook her famous spicy chili. She was in the kitchen proud, showing off to Ryan the family recipe she had learned. The smell was delicious, but we all knew Sarah could not eat spicy food. Her face would turn red, and she would start coughing with just a little bit of heat. When the food was served, Sarah looked at the steaming plate with eyes full of confusion. She did not dare to touch it. She just looked at me silently, as if asking for help. I quickly went to the kitchen and prepared a bowl of chicken noodle soup for her, her favorite food. When I brought it to her, Jessica saw it and said to Ryan with a soft but mocking voice, "Look, your daughter only enjoys simple things. I spent all afternoon making this." Ryan smiled uncomfortably, saying nothing, and I felt my heart tighten. I wanted to scream that the girl was not picky, that she was just a little one who needed affection. But I stayed silent, as I had so many times before, to keep the peace. Then I remembered the day Sarah won first place in the Halloween drawing contest at school. She ran home hugging her blue ribbon and a gift certificate for the bookstore, her face radiant as the sun. "Grandma, I won," she shouted, showing me the ribbon. Ryan, who was rarely home, congratulated her and hugged her proudly. But Jessica, sitting in a corner painting her nails, she just looked at her and said, "The other kids must have drawn really badly." Her tone was light, like a casual comment, but I saw how Sarah's smile vanished instantly. She lowered her head, and the ribbon in her hands lost all its shine. I hugged her and whispered that I was very proud of her, but I knew Jessica's words had left a small scar on the child's heart. The beeping of the monitor brought me back to the present. I adjusted Sarah's blanket carefully, pulling it up to her chin. Those fragments of memory which before seemed like just small cracks, awkward moments I tried to ignore for Ryan's happiness now made sense. I had convinced myself that Jessica just needed time, that she would learn to love Sarah. But after that cruel post, I understood I had been wrong. Those cracks were not accidental. They were part of a bigger picture of a calculated cruelty disguised with fake smiles and sweet words. I felt a silent rage, but more than that, a deep pain. Pain for not having seen it sooner. Pain for having allowed Sarah to suffer so much. Sarah moved slightly and slowly opened her eyes. She looked at me and smiled weakly, like a ray of sunshine filtering through dark clouds. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice hoarse with tiredness. I took her hand and squeezed it gently, trying to give her some warmth. "I'm here, my love," I said in a sweet voice, even though I felt a storm inside. Sarah looked around the room. Her innocent eyes scanned the white walls and the cold medical equipment. Then she looked up and asked me a question that squeezed my heart. "Grandma, is Aunt Jessica here?" I saw a fragile hope, an immense desire to be loved by that woman whom she still called Aunt. But I could not lie to her. I could not tell her that Jessica had been here worried about her. Because the truth was, she never showed up. She did not even ask about her. I just stroked her hair tenderly and smiled sadly. "Rest, my love," I told her, my voice breaking. In that silence, my determination turned to iron. Jessica would never again have the chance to get close enough to hurt this child. A week later, I took Sarah home. Ryan drove, but Jessica was not with him. He said she had the flu in an evasive tone, as if he was hiding something. I did not ask any more questions. I just nodded and helped Sarah inside. The house still had the cold air of that interrupted party. I had already cleaned up the broken glass, but the feeling of emptiness was still there, like a ghost hiding in every corner. I looked around and saw the Christmas tree still standing in the corner of the living room, its twinkling lights only making my chest feel heavier. Ryan walked Sarah to her room, gently helping her lie down. He stayed for a moment. He asked, "How are you feeling? Do you need anything?" But his eyes kept glancing at his watch, as if counting the seconds until he could leave. Before leaving, he put a wad of cash in my hand and said hurriedly, "Mom, buy the girl some vitamins. Jessica and I are going to Lake Geneva for a few days so she can clear her head." I looked at the money without saying anything. I just nodded. His words had no warmth. They sounded like a duty fulfilled without a soul. I put the money in my pocket, but a deep disappointment grew inside me. My son, whom I raised with all my love, now seemed to just want to run away from his responsibilities. The following days, the house became strangely quiet. It was just Sarah and me, the two of us together in calm. I made her chicken noodle soup, her favorite dish since she was a child. The aroma of the broth mixed with cilantro and lemon made her smile, although her smile was still weak. I sat by her bed and read her stories from the old book that Richard used to read to Ryan when he was little. We watched black and white movies on the old TV, and Sarah's laughter filled the room when the main character did something clumsy. The absence of Ryan and Jessica, even if temporary, made the house seem to breathe again. I felt a peace I had not felt in a long time, but deep down I knew it was just the calm before the storm. When Sarah was better and could move around the house on her own, I decided to go out for some fresh air. I walked to the Sweetheart Bakery, owned by my best friend Irene Davis. My best friend since our youth. The smell of freshly baked bread and roasted coffee welcomed me as soon as I walked through the door. Irene, with her silver hair pulled back in a high bun and her warm smile, saw me and waved. "Stella, come," she called, taking me to the small office behind the counter. She served me a cup of hot coffee with milk, its soft aroma enveloping me like a hug. In front of me, she placed a golden, still-warm croissant. "You look tired," she said with a look full of affection. I told Irene everything, from the terrifying Christmas Eve to Jessica's cruel post. She listened in silence, sometimes shaking her head or clicking her tongue, her kind eyes full of understanding. When I mentioned Jessica's attitude, Irene sighed. "I never liked that girl from the first time Ryan brought her here." Her eyes looked at everything as if she was putting a price tag on it without an ounce of affection. Her words touched a deep part of my heart where I had tried to bury my own doubts about Jessica. We were quiet for a while, looking out the window at the neighbors passing by with full bags to start their day. The everyday calm of our town made me feel relieved, if only for a moment. Suddenly, Irene turned to me, her eyes shining as if she had just remembered something important. "Stella," she said, slowly, thoughtfully, "I remember the day your husband Richard made his will. He was very worried about little Sarah's future. I think the house, he left it to her. Didn't he?" Irene's question was like a lightning bolt to my mind. I froze, feeling time stop. Memories of Richard flooded me clear and vivid. I remembered that day when he sat at the dining room table, took my hand tightly and said in a firm but calm voice, "I want to make sure that no matter what happens, our Sarah always has a home. You will take care of that for me, Stella." At that moment, it was just a promise between spouses, but now those words had become a light, showing me the way. I thanked Irene hurriedly and almost ran back home, my heart pounding hard. I could not wait another second. Upon entering the room, I went straight to Richard's old mahogany chest where he kept his most precious items. I opened the lid, and a smell of mothballs and old paper enveloped me, bringing back all the memories of the man I loved all my life. Inside was his favorite clothing, still with a faint scent of him. There was also our wedding photo album, already yellowed, and the letters he wrote me when we were young, with crooked letters full of love. I took them out carefully, placing them to the side, my hands trembling as if touching something sacred. At the bottom of the chest, under a faded linen cloth, I found a bundle of documents tied with a blue ribbon. I opened it, trembling with bated breath. The first line on the thick sheet, sealed with a red stamp, jumped out at my eyes. "Last will and testament of Richard." I flipped through the pages quickly, my heart pounding in my chest, and then I saw it clear as day. "The entire house located at this address will be inherited by my only granddaughter, Sarah. My wife, Stella, will be the guardian and administrator of said property until my granddaughter turns 18. I gripped the paper tightly, feeling its weight in my hands. It was not just a document. It was Richard's voice from beyond, reminding me that he had always put Sarah above everything else. I remember I could not sleep a minute. I sat in the usual kitchen, the place that was once filled with Richard's laughter and those warm family nights. On the table, a copy of Richard's will rested neatly next to a cup of chamomile tea that had long gone cold. I read every clause, every line over and over, as if I wanted to burn them into my mind. The next morning, as the first rays of dawn filtered through the red roofs of our town, I picked up the phone and called Adam Miller. He was an old college buddy of Richard's, a respected lawyer with a strong voice and a kind smile. "Stella, long time no see," he said, when he answered with the same energy as when we were young, and Richard used to invite him over for casserole and to argue about football. I got straight to the point and made an appointment for the afternoon. "I need to talk about Richard's will," I said, trying to stay calm even though my heart was pounding. He agreed immediately, and I sensed a seriousness in his tone that confirmed he suspected this was not just a casual visit. Before leaving the house, I got dressed with care. I placed the copy of the will inside an old leather briefcase that Richard used for his documents when he worked at the bank. I also printed the screenshot of Jessica's post, along with the cruel comments from her friends. Seeing the words, "Finally got rid of that clown," Clearly printed on the paper, I felt a cold fury awaken inside me. I put the printouts in a separate envelope. I sealed it tight, as if sealing a declaration of war. Before walking out the door, I stopped in front of Sarah's room. She was sleeping peacefully, her face serene, the blanket I had put on her last night still covering her small shoulders. I kissed her on the forehead and whispered, "I am going to protect you, my love." Then I left, with determination etched in my soul. Mr. Miller's office was in the center of town, in an old building with wrought iron balconies and delicate ornaments. As I entered, I was enveloped by the smell of old paper and leather, a mixture that gave me a strange sense of calm. The shelves reached the ceiling, filled with thick law books, like silent guardians of justice. Adam received me with a firm handshake, the same kind smile as always. "Sit down, Stella," he said, as he prepared me a glass of lemonade, knowing I always liked it. The citrus aroma eased my tension a bit, though only for an instant. I started to speak in a calm but firm voice. I told him about Christmas Eve, the moment Sarah collapsed, the agonizing hours at the hospital, and finally Jessica's cruel post. Adam listened without interrupting, his eyes full of empathy. When I finished, I placed the briefcase on the table and took out the copy of the will. "This is what Richard left," I said, pushing the document towards him. Adam nodded gravely. "I remember this will very well. Stella Richard's wishes were very clear." Then I took out the envelope with the printouts and slid it gently towards him. "And this is why I must fulfill his wish." Adam put on his glasses and carefully examined each photo. His kind face gradually turned serious, his eyebrows furrowed. When he read the lines written by Jessica, I saw his hand pause as if he could not believe what he was seeing. He put the papers down, took off his glasses, and looked at me with eyes full of indignation. "I cannot believe it," he said in a grave but sharp voice. "That girl is cruel. Stella, how can anyone be so insensitive?" I did not respond. I just nodded, feeling a small comfort in knowing I was not alone in my indignation. Adam got up, walked to the bookshelf, and took out a thick law book. He flipped through a few pages, moving his fingers nimbly, as if he had done this thousands of times. Then he turned. He looked at me directly and said in a firm voice, "Stella, you have every right. As the legal guardian of the homeowner, you have the authority to demand that anyone whose name does not appear on the property documents and who does not have your consent leave the premises. Ryan is your son, but Jessica has no legal tie to that property." His words were like a gust of wind that blew away the last doubts I had. I felt a new strength, as if Richard were by my side giving me courage. He explained the steps to follow. Draft a formal legal document demanding that Jessica leave within 30 days, as established by law. If she did not comply, we could begin eviction proceedings. Then he looked at me with a serious but understanding expression. "Are you sure you want to do this, Stella? It will not be easy. The family will be affected." He left the sentence hanging in the air, but I understood what he meant. I knew this decision could put a new distance between my son and me, but I had no other choice. I looked out the window and saw the colorful roofs of our town stretching out under the afternoon light. The narrow streets, the yellow and red walls, everything was part of my life, of my family. I thought of Sarah, of her innocent question, "Is Aunt Jessica coming?" And I felt my heart tighten. I looked Adam in the eyes and said without hesitation, "I am more sure than ever. Adam helped me draft that document. Justice for my granddaughter cannot wait any longer." Adam nodded, and a slight smile appeared on his face. "All right, Stella," he said. "Richard would be proud of you." A week had passed since the meeting with Mr. Miller, but time seemed to stretch on endlessly. My granddaughter's life and mine returned to a certain calm, at least on the surface. I helped Sarah with her homework, teaching her how to solve the problems she still struggled with. We watered the geranium pots on the balcony together, red flowers that seemed to remind us of the lifeblood of our town. Sarah laughed more, but sometimes I noticed a distance in her eyes, as if she was looking for something she could not express. The legal notice with its cold but powerful lines was tucked away in a large envelope hidden in the kitchen drawer. Every time I opened it to get a knife or a spoon, I saw it reminding me that the storm was approaching. I knew that when Ryan and Jessica returned, everything would change forever. One Saturday afternoon, my phone vibrated. A text from Ryan. "We are almost home. Mom, do you want us to buy anything?" I looked at the screen. My fingers paused over the keyboard. For a moment, I wanted to answer as usual, ask him to buy some oranges or bread, but I just wrote a short sentence. "No need, son." I put the phone aside, feeling as if I had crossed an invisible line. Today, I was not going to keep avoiding things. Today, I was going to face them. I took a deep breath. Trying to stay calm, I asked Sarah to go to her room to put on her headphones to listen to music or watch a movie on her tablet. "Grandma has to do something, my love," I said, smiling to hide the tension. She nodded obediently without asking questions. I went to the kitchen and took the envelope with the legal notice from the drawer. I placed it carefully in the center of the oak table where Richard used to sit to write his will, where our family once gathered on happy days. Next to it, I left the color printout of Jessica's post face down with the cruel phrase underlined in red, waiting for the moment to be revealed. Finally, I prepared a pot of chamomile tea, its soft aroma like an invisible shield helping me maintain my serenity. I sat down, my hands clasped, and I waited. The sound of keys turning in the lock broke the silence of the house. The door opened, and Ryan entered, followed by Jessica, loaded with shopping bags from Lake Geneva. Jessica looked radiant with tanned skin and eyes shining with joy from the trip. She threw her purse on the sofa and exclaimed enthusiastically, "Oh, I am exhausted. But it was so much fun, Mom. Look at this scarf. Isn't it pretty? I bought it for you." She held up a colorful silk scarf, as if that gift could erase all the tension. Ryan smiled tiredly, leaving the bags on the floor. "Hi, Mom." He said, his gaze passing over me. "Where is Sarah?" I did not answer. I just sat there silent, looking towards the dining room table. My silence was like an invisible wall that made their joy fade. Jessica frowned. Sensing something strange, she approached the table, her gaze inquisitive. "What is this?" she asked in a suspicious tone. Without waiting for an answer, she grabbed the envelope and tore it open impatiently, as if she wanted to destroy any obstacle in her path. I watched her closely, every little change in her face. Her eyes moved quickly over the legal lines, going from confusion to disbelief. Then she saw her name and the phrase, "Order to vacate within 30 days." Her face, beautiful until then, deformed with rage, her lips pressed into a hard line. "What the hell is this?" she screamed, crumpling the paper in her hands. She turned to me with her eyes wide. "You crazy old woman, how dare you do this to me?" Her shrill voice echoed through the house like an unexpected storm. Ryan ran towards her, snatching the crumpled paper from her hands. He read it, his face pale, his hands trembling. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice breaking, as if he could not believe what was happening. I looked at my son, the son I had loved, and for whom I had sacrificed my whole life, and I felt a deep pain. He did not understand or did not want to understand that I was doing all this for Sarah, for the family he had abandoned. Jessica did not stop. She approached me, pointing her finger and yelling, "This is my husband's house. You have no right here." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, even though my heart was pounding. I turned over the photo that was face down on the table, showing Jessica's smiling face and the cruel sentence written below. "Finally got rid of the girl who thinks she's the center of the world." I took a red marker and circled the words, without looking away from her, while my granddaughter was on the operating table. I said, my voice firm, but without raising it, "You posted this." The air in the room became thick. Jessica looked at the photo with wide eyes, not out of regret, but for being exposed. She opened her mouth wanting to say something, but no words came out. Ryan was still standing there with the crumpled paper in his hand, his gaze wavering between his wife and me. I stood up and looked her straight in the eye. "And you are wrong, Jessica," I said coldly, but with all the strength I had left. This is not your husband's house. It is Sarah's house according to her grandfather's will, and you have 30 days to leave." Jessica threw the paper on the floor. Her scream echoed through the silent house. "I am not going anywhere. We'll see about that." She turned and ran out of the room, slamming the bedroom door shut. Ryan stood motionless, unable to speak, his face full of pain and confusion. I looked at him. I wanted to say something to comfort him, but I could not. The door to war had been thrown wide open, and I knew there was no turning back. During the first 3 days after the confrontation with Jessica and Ryan, my house became a silent battlefield. Jessica locked herself in her room and only came out when Sarah and I were not in the living room. The faint sound of her footsteps, tense and uncomfortable, was a constant reminder that the peace was just an illusion. Ryan tried to talk to me, but his words led nowhere. "Mom, think about it," he said in a pleading voice. "Jessica, she did not mean to hurt you." I looked at him, the man I had raised, and I responded calmly but with decision. "The decision is already made. Ryan, you have to choose." He lowered his head without saying more, and I knew he was torn between his wife and his mother, between duty and his own weakness. Every time I saw him, I noticed a greater distance between us, a crack impossible to repair. On the 4th day, the real storm broke, not inside my house, but on social media. The one who threw the first stone was Mary Jessica's mother. She posted a photo of her daughter sitting on the sofa with red eyes and her hands covering her face as if she had just been crying. The photo was accompanied by a long, emotional, but calculated text. It told how her daughter had cared with all her heart for her husband's daughter, that she had always tried to be a good mother to Sarah, but that a cruel mother-in-law jealous of her son's happiness had thrown her out of the house. The text also hinted that I had taken advantage of Sarah's illness to stage a farce and take over the family assets. I read each line feeling as if a bucket of ice water had been thrown on me. The lies were written so carefully that they seemed like a perfectly constructed story to turn me into the villain. Less than an hour later, Jessica reshared her mother's post, adding a short but dramatic sentence. "My heart is broken. I just wanted to build a family, but maybe I was never enough." Her post spread with surprising speed. Friends, relatives, even people I had never met shared the post, accompanying it with compassionate comments for Jessica. "Poor thing," one person wrote. "What an injustice," another commented. No one stopped to ask what the truth was. No one thought about Sarah, about what she had had to endure. I looked at the phone screen. The notifications appeared like arrows pointing directly at me, and I felt a profound loneliness. The world out there seemed to have chosen to side with Jessica, just because she knew how to tell a story with tears. The pressure started to mount from all sides. The house phone rang off the hook. My cousin Linda called, her voice worried. "Stella, what's going on? They are talking about you on the internet." I tried to explain briefly, but my voice broke. I could not say everything I felt. When I went to the market, I recognized some neighbors who used to always greet me with a smile and now looked at me with judgmental eyes. An old flower vendor even whispered to the person next to her when I passed, "That's the evil mother-in-law they are talking about." I also received several messages from unknown accounts calling me an evil mother-in-law with cruel insults. I tried to stay calm, but every word, every look was like a knife that wounded my pride. Ryan came home one afternoon, his face gaunt and his eyes red. He held out the phone to me. With a trembling voice, "Mom, look, my friends, my colleagues, everyone is asking, you are destroying the family's reputation." I looked at the screen and saw messages from his coworkers' comments on social media, all against me. But instead of feeling guilty, I only felt a contained rage begin to ignite. I looked my son in the eyes, and in a cold voice I said, "And what about your daughter's honor, Ryan, who is protecting Sarah?" He lowered his head, did not respond, and in that instant I understood that I could no longer count on him. Ryan chose to stay on the sidelines, leaving Sarah and me to face this storm alone. Exhaustion and loneliness began to envelop me. I sought refuge at Irene's Sweetheart Bakery, the only place where I felt safe. Irene said nothing when she saw me walk in silent. She placed a cup of hot chocolate and a slice of cheesecake, soft and sweet, in front of me. The warm aroma of the chocolate enveloped me, and before I knew it, tears were streaming down my cheeks. I cried not because of the criticism, but because of the helplessness of seeing the world turn its back on the truth. Irene sat next to me and let me cry without judgment, without empty comforts. When I calmed down, she took my hand, her voice firm but compassionate. "Stella, they are rewriting the story. If you do not speak, their story will become the truth for people." She squeezed my hand, her gaze lit. "You have proof, you have the truth. Do not let your silence help their lies." Irene's words were like a breath of new life in my mind. I returned home more relieved, but determined. When I entered the living room, I found Sarah sitting at the table trying to do her homework, but with her eyes full of worry. She looked up and in a soft voice said, "Grandma, are you okay?" I smiled and stroked her hair, but I knew she had already felt the tension in the air. I cannot let her live with this fear any longer. I must act, not just for me, but for Sarah, for the promise to Richard. That night after Sarah fell asleep, I turned on my laptop. The screen lit up and my social media feed appeared full of dozens of notifications, critical comments, and words of accusation. I took a deep breath, put my fingers on the keyboard, and felt as if I were holding a sword. It was time for the truth to speak. I opened the evidence folder on my computer, where I had saved everything: Jessica's posts, the cruel comments, and the copy of Richard's will. I chose 3 important photos. I organized them with a purpose, like a storyteller preparing for the climax of her story. Each image was a piece of the puzzle, and I knew that together they would tell a story impossible to deny. I began to write. Not with anger, but with the heart of a mother, of a grandmother who had seen too much pain, but who still chose to stand up for what is right. I wrote slowly, letting each word flow from deep within me. In the first paragraph, I affirmed my love for my family, for Ryan, and above all, for Sarah. Silence is not always golden. Sometimes it is complicity. I wrote, "Today I must speak not to argue, but to defend the truth and protect my only granddaughter." Those lines were a declaration not just to the world, but also to myself. A promise that I would not let the truth continue to be distorted. In the second paragraph, I briefly recounted what happened on Christmas Eve without embellishments or exaggerations. "When Sarah collapsed in pain, we rushed her to the hospital," I wrote. "The doctor said she had acute appendicitis and that a little more delay would have put her life in danger." I deliberately did not describe Jessica as cruel or insensitive. I let the facts speak for themselves to paint the portrait of who she really was. The third paragraph was the core of the post. I chose each word carefully. While my son and I waited outside the operating room, my daughter-in-law posted a photo on her social media. I prefer not to comment on its content. I will let everyone judge for themselves. There was no need to add anything more. Jessica's photo with the cruel phrase, "finally free of the girl who always wants to get attention," would speak for itself. In the last paragraph, I resolved the issue of the house, once and for all. "As for the house where we live, it does not belong to me or my son," I wrote. "It is the inheritance that my late husband Richard left to his granddaughter Sarah. I am only the legal guardian. Asking someone with no inheritance rights to leave is simply fulfilling my husband's will and protecting my granddaughter's only safe refuge." I paused. I read each line and felt the weight of the words. It was not just a post. It was a declaration of war against the lie. I attached the 3 photos. The first was a screenshot of Jessica's post with her malicious phrase circled in red with a simple editing tool. The second was the page from Richard's will with Sarah's and my names highlighted, clear and undeniable. Finally, I chose a photo I took at the hospital. It was not the moment Sarah lay motionless in bed, but when she was trying to sit up with the IV still connected. Her face pale, but her gaze full of trust in me. That photo was not only real, but more moving than any story. It was the most living proof of my granddaughter's love and strength. I read the text one more time, checking every sentence, every period. Then I tagged Jessica and her mother Mary to make sure they and their friends saw it. I did not do it for revenge, but for the truth to come to light. With a deep breath, I pressed the post button. The computer screen flickered, and my post officially appeared on social media. I closed the laptop, got up, and went to sleep. I did not want to see the reactions immediately. I knew that the truth needs time to spread, and I had already done what I had to do. The next morning, when I turned on my phone, it almost froze from the number of notifications. My post had thousands of shares and hundreds of comments. I started reading with my heart beating fast, but not from fear, but from a sense of relief. The comments section was not a fight as I feared. On the contrary, it was an overwhelming agreement. People expressed their outrage at Jessica's actions and their support for me and Sarah. "How horrible! How can someone be so insensitive?" one person wrote. "Aunt Stella, we are always with you," a distant relative commented publicly. A former neighbor whom I had not seen in a long time wrote, "I always knew Mrs. Stella was a strong and loving woman with her family. Sarah is very lucky to have her." Those words, though simple, were like drops of cool water that soothed my wounded heart. Jessica's and Mary's posts were now filled with critical comments. "You should be ashamed for lying," someone wrote. "Sarah is just a child. How could you treat her like that?" another person added. I received a message from Linda. Her voice sounded excited on the phone. "Stella, the whole town is talking about your post. Everyone is on your side, and Sarah's." I smiled, but deep down I did not feel victory. I just felt relief, as if an invisible weight had been lifted from my shoulders. That afternoon, I received a notification that Jessica had deleted her post and shut down her social media accounts. Mary also went silent, without saying a word. The online battle did not end with screams or arguments. It ended with the truth exposed with my calm but firm voice. The remaining 20 days of the 30-day notice passed in a dense silence, as if the whole house was holding its breath. Jessica and Ryan barely left their room. They only peeked out occasionally like shadows gliding down the hallway. When they spoke, it was in soft arguments behind closed doors, tense whispers that I chose to ignore. I heard the sound of cardboard folding, of packing tape sealing boxes, and of furniture being dragged across the wooden floor. I spent time with Sarah, trying to maintain a space of peace for her amidst so much tension. We made donuts together, her favorite dessert, although her small hands were still clumsy at sprinkling the sugar. I told her stories about her grandfather Richard, about the times he took me for walks through the cobbled streets of our town, pointing out each house and telling me who lived there. Sarah listened with shining eyes, and I knew those stories were not just memories, but a way to remind her that she is loved, that she has an inheritance that no one can take away. On the 30th day, a truck pulled up in front of my house. The hoarse sound of the engine broke the morning silence. 2 men got out silently and began carrying the cardboard boxes from the house to the vehicle. Jessica was the first to appear, her face hidden behind large sunglasses. The red dress she always wore now seemed out of place among the gray boxes. She walked directly to the truck without looking at me once, without saying a word. I stood in the doorway, my arms crossed, feeling like I was saying goodbye to a nightmare, but inside me there was no satisfaction, just a quiet coldness, like when a wound finally stops bleeding. Ryan came out last. He stopped in front of me, an old suitcase in his hand, his eyes red and his face gaunt. He looked like he had aged 10 years in a few weeks. "Mom," he began, his voice hoarse, as if each word cost him effort. I'm sorry." I looked into my son's eyes, the child I had brought into the world, whom I had raised with all my love, and I saw in them a sincere regret, but also a deep helplessness. I wanted to hug him, to tell him everything would be okay, like I did when he was a child and he fell, but I could not this time. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice firm but calm. "That apology is not for me. Ryan," I said without looking away, "it is for your daughter. The only thing you need to do now is visit her more often. Show her that you are a father." He nodded, his lips pressed tight, holding back tears. Then he turned and walked out of the house, the suitcase dragging across the patio with a dry sound. When the door closed, the click of the lock did not sound like an end, but like a beginning. I stood there feeling the air inside the house become lighter, as if a breeze had passed through, carrying away the dark clouds. I went into the living room, where the afternoon light of our town streamed through the window, painting the room in a warm golden hue. Sarah was sitting on the windowsill, her sketchbook open on her lap, but she was not drawing. She was just looking at the colorful roofs outside, with a gaze as clear as the sky after the rain. I approached, sat next to her, and watched her in silence. "It's so quiet. Grandma?" she said with a soft smile. Her voice, though small, sounded like a sweet melody that caressed my heart. I stroked her black hair, breathed in her familiar scent, and whispered, "Yes, my love, this house is finally truly ours." I hugged Sarah's small shoulders, feeling her warmth in my arms. I watched the sunset, the roofs shining under the last rays of the sun, and I knew the scars were still there in me, in Sarah, and perhaps in Ryan too, but we had survived. Justice had been served not with swords or screams, but with the strength of truth and unconditional love. This house, Richard's legacy, was now Sarah's safe refuge, and I would do everything possible to keep it that way. In the following days, Sarah and I began to rebuild our simple routines. We cooked together, cared for the small garden, and I taught her how to make the spiced cider that Richard loved so much. Every afternoon we sat on the windowsill to watch our town sink into the sunset, and I told her stories about her grandfather, about the dreams he had left in this house. Sarah listened with shining eyes, and I knew she was learning to heal little by little. I do not know if Ryan will ever be the father Sarah needs. I do not know if Jessica will ever look back and acknowledge her mistakes. But I know one thing for sure in this house: from now on, there will only be space for peace. The story you have just heard has had names and places changed to protect the identity of the people involved. We do not tell it to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers suffer in silence within their own home? I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace, or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can be a candle that lights the way for others. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. For now, on the end screen, I will leave 2 of the most beloved stories from the Elderly Stories channel. I am sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.